As it's becoming pretty standard at this point, I'm working on another wedding plate here, and I've got to start on the border, so working on the kind of side addition there between the names and the date. And this is an alteration of a different plate that I've already done, but taking this cross leaf, or rather crossed feather design, and adding it here. And in the original plate that I did that incorporated this, this was a repeated motif around forming a border on the plate. So I had to make some modifications to it to suit this purpose, where it's just kind of a standalone, smaller section, not a continuous border like it was. So one of those changes is, rather than being a circle around the inside, it comes up and follows the contour of the feathers here. I apologize if I go off camera. This is a bit of a larger plate, 14 inches, so it requires a little bit of room to maneuver as I rotate it around and do the carving. So the outside of this is just ends up being a thin sort of line kind of border, nothing too fancy there. Obviously it gets a little bit more complicated into the middle section there, where the, I don't know, stem, whatever that part of the feather is, comes in. But one thing I think is pretty cool about chip carving is, this is a unique design, unusual, not usually chip carving feathers, and but it doesn't really matter, doesn't really require any different techniques or knowledge or skill. Everything in chip carving is kind of the same thing, whether it's abstract designs like this rosette in the middle, or letters or numbers or feathers. It's all exactly the same technique of following the lines and making the same angles. The design kind of takes care of it for you, in my opinion. You just do the same thing every time, and the lines that you already have on the wood kind of do the work. But realize that's probably easy to say as someone with more experience when you're first getting started. Probably doesn't feel much like the design is doing any work for you. So now that bottom part's done, do same thing, start moving around to the top part here. Same idea all the way up to this point. And this is another place that I made a modification. Well, I guess I didn't really modify it from the original design, but there's this extra square part, kind of diamond in there that doesn't really seem to fit necessarily with the feathers, but in the original design, since this was a border, the inside and the outside were both continuous, and so I would have had a really big just gap there if I had left it. So I added the square as a means of kind of filling in that space. And so I just kept that the same for this design. I could have brought this whole edge down in there as well, but I think it fills it out, gives it some size to work well on the edge of this plate. Might have been a little thin or hollow if I had left this part out. These ends can be a little bit tricky because they're kind of tight points coming around the side, so trying to keep those smooth and consistent. A little bit of a trick there, but not too bad. See, I kind of left a little bit of a extra part there. Smooth that out. And same down here, you might be able to see in this shadow, when I came around the bottom of this feather, it kind of went off my line a little bit there, so I'll kind of come in here and try to even that out. Doing this kind of touch-up work, you got to be real careful with not removing too much to make it look bad. You don't want to regret trying to fix it and make it look worse. One thing that's pretty much always the case, probably in most forms of art, but definitely in chip carving, is you're probably going to be your biggest critic. You're going to know all the mistakes you made, all the things that didn't go quite right. And most people, when they look at chip carving, they just see how awesome it looks, even if you're just getting started or kind of mediocre results. It's a unique thing people aren't used to seeing, so there's a lot to take in, and they don't necessarily know exactly what perfect chip carving is supposed to look like. So you don't usually have to worry too much about all the exact details, so it is good to strive for those and recognize where you can improve. So in order to give it some depth, as these cross, you can see on this side I etched out the background on this one so that it looks like this stem is coming in front. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to do it symmetrically, so this one's on top on this side, so I'll do the same one on top, which means this one's going to have to get cut out here. These don't require removing a lot of wood, just enough to break that line. And we'll do the kind of standard chip carving diamond here. This one's a pretty cool design for being as common as it is and pretty easy as it is. It's all just straight lines around it, so I think that makes it a bit easier than some intricate curve, and then just taking out these little chips on the side really spruces it up and makes it look pretty interesting and appealing compared to just a square. But it's really easy to do, so it's always good when you can have something that's interesting and easy. So then, to give this more of a feather appearance than just a leaf, we've got these little notches that oftentimes when you look at feathers, the little pieces of them aren't all connected. There's little gaps that as they kind of split, and you can actually push them back together like little zippers. But often when you just kind of pick one up off the ground, they're a little bit disconnected like this, so trying to play off of that to give more the impression of feathers with this design. So they're kind of irregular and different as far as the size and placement on them. These were done by hand. All the rest of it's done on the computer, but then I wait and add these notches just by hand. Okay, and then the last part is etching out the vein that runs along the middle. And so again, it's not a big removal of wood here, just a small kind of etch. But especially once this is stained and the stain gets down in that little groove, it'll stand out and make a big difference compared to if it weren't there. Because otherwise this is just solid wood and you would have no indication of that difference there. So it doesn't take a whole lot to just kind of break up the solid plane of the feather. And I gotta be careful at the tip here because it comes to a point, and so the wood on the inside that I'm not removing gets very thin and fragile at the end, and I want to make sure to not undercut and weaken that, especially since there's still some pattern marks on there, so I'm going to have to use the eraser to remove those. And so again, being careful at that point to keep that protected. And one nice thing about this being a feather and having kind of the organic feel to it is if everything's not exactly even and perfect and straight or whatever, it's not really that big of a deal. It works with kind of the natural motif of a feather anyway. Got a little bit off my line there, but don't think there's much I can do to adjust that at this point. Kind of what I was just talking about, the imperfections. Looks like it might be a little wide down here, so I'll move a little bit more of the center vein there. And that's about it for making the crossed feather design.